So, hey guys, this is the almost as infamous as the original video follow up to my Yes, Artists Can Scam People video. I talked about how I wanted to make this when I originally made that video, which is where majority of my viewers recently came from. And the reason why I've been waiting to do the follow up video is because you really just see a lot of it on YouTube in the artist community. There isn't anything, in my mind, too new or too unheard of about it, at least in the artist community in general, not just on YouTube. That being said, I still did want to share my personal experiences and stories, and the sad thing is, despite maybe one of these commission little story times that I wrote down and instances I've had to deal with things, they've all happened multiple times, which is also why I kind of waited to do it, because I'm like, this just happens a lot. And now, for a lot of artists out there who don't do commissions like I do, this might sound very like, oh, well, that's terrible. And it's sad to say this shit is normal, which is why I constantly say, and my buddies who are full-time commission artists constantly say, you either get paid up front or you get paid half up front, because this shit happens all the time. And it also has to do with why in my own personal TOS, which is a terms of service, I explain that, I will not start your commission unless you are a trusted commissioner. By that, it's like you've commissioned me multiple times, or I personally know you, so I will start your commission. I might not finish it until I'm paid, but even then, there are a small amount of people that I will wait. I'll get it done, and then I'll wait to get paid to give it to them, but that's because they have earned trust with me. And while I hate to say it, it's really hard to learn trust when you've been doing commissions as long as I do, because there are a shit ton of people out there who want to scam you. So let's just get right into this, why don't we? So I'm going to start off right now with the pros and cons of the DeviantArt point system, because this is one I get all the time, and it drives me up a wall, and I know I'm not the only one. Now, DeviantArt has a points system, so for people who don't have PayPal, you can use points to pay commissioners, and you can using a special widget on your front page, they can pay you in the commissions, and then, they can pay you in the points for a commissioner, for an adoptable, or for something, or just give to you. And then, within 15 days of DeviantArt processing it, they will give you the money, and you can have it in either e-check format or PayPal format. For me, PayPal is the easiest one, so I just go with that. The reason why I say it's terrible, as well as a good thing, is because so many people do not understand the value of points. So I will have an adoptable, or a commission, or a yacha, or my friends will, up, and I'll have the price clearly as day, and they'll be like, oh, okay, I'll send you it in points, and I usually accept points, and I'll be like, okay, and I'll make the widget. I'm like, there it is, and they're like, oh, I already sent it. And let's say the commission let's say the adoptable's $20, okay? That might sound like a lot for a lot of people, but that's kind of average. If it's like an off-base, full-body, non-chibi adoptable, that's around the average point for a nicely designed adoptable. Not in the industry, but whatever, that's the whole other story. But I'll get someone be like, oh, okay, here's 20 points. And then I explain to them, I send them the points back, and I explain, I'm like, oh, I'm sorry, but that's 20 cents. And they're like, no, it's 20 points. And I'm like, which is 20 cents. You literally have a converter in the commission widget, so $20 is 2,000 points. And they're like, oh, well, I don't have that kind of money. Why won't you take my 20 points? And I'm like, because it's 20 cents when the thing you want is $20. I'm not gonna get, oh, ow, bump my headset. I'm not going to give you something that is worth $20 for 20 cents. That's ludicrous and crazy. And in almost any other work environment and industry, or where you're paying for goods and services, that usually never happens unless it's like a yard sale, and even then it's like that person's got to really want to get rid of something to be like, this is tagged $20. Well, I have 20 cents. Okay, fine, take it. It's like, it's not how it works. That's just the start of, because that happens all the time. I will say, honestly, almost every time I am open for commissions or adoptables or anything, I will get that question, or I will get people doing this, and it's really irritating, but at the same time, it happens so much that you just kind of get used to it. And yeah, so there's the first one. The next one was an instance, I've talked about this off and on streams, and this was years ago. This is back when I used to offer sketches, and this wasn't like when I used to offer my sketches that I kind of offer now. And this is back when I remember because I was in college and I was working. So I was doing commissions just for kind of like shits and giggles. I didn't really need the money. I was like, whatever, commissions are open. And I was realistically using commissions to pay for like other commissions. So like I would get commissions so I could pay other people to draw my characters and stuff. But this person, I don't even remember what they wanted, but I remember it was a full body something. And it was going to cost them $5 for the entire thing to be done. It was going to be $5. And I sent them a whip and they were like, "Oh, can you change it to this pose?" And so I changed it to that pose. And then but they kept asking me to do this about 10 to 15 times. I don't remember exactly, but I realized that I was giving this person 10 to 15 because they were completely different sketches. It wasn't a small edit. It wasn't like oh, can you change the hairstyle? Oh, change the expression. Oh, can you change where the hands are? These were completely different poses, movements, hairstyles, and I realized I was getting ripped off for $5. And I explained to them, and I'm like, "Oh, I'm so sorry, I'm not doing this anymore." And they were like, "Oh, well, I want a refund." And I'm like, "I gave you 10 to 15 sketches, because this was years ago. I don't remember how many it was, but I know it was around that range." And they were like, "Well, I want a refund. You didn't promise what you explained." And I'm like, "I gave you 10 to 15 different poses, expressions, the whole 9 yards. Granted, I think my art was pretty ass back then, but it was $5, okay? And again, at the time, I didn't need the money. I didn't need this stress. So the guy, just freaking like spammed me, was being an asshole, kept demanding a refund. They didn't get their refund. But that was when I had to make my editing rule for commissions to where you get like 3 minor edits and 1 big edit before I have to charge you a fee, because I don't have time to keep doing this. Especially back then when I had a job and school and, somewhat of a life. So there's another one. Another one was that, and this was the one time I used to do you get paid once you're finished. I tried doing that because a lot of my friends told me to do that to help with my, get shit done faster thing. So I was doing it. It was doing well for a little while there. But then I had this one. I've had this one commission happen. And this is one I've heard about. I've heard it happen to other people too. So I know I'm not alone here. Was they wanted multiple characters, a background, and they wanted the characters interacting. Again, this was a while ago, so my prices were really fucking cheap. But still, I had gotten it done. I'm like, okay, the price was gonna be, honestly, I think it'd be less than $40, realistically, for this giant rendered thing, because that's how cheap I was at the time, because I felt like my art isn't where it is now, which it really was. It wasn't. So, it's like, okay. And then they were like, "Oh, well, I don't have the money, but you got it done, so can I have it anyway?" And I'm like, "No, I did this. Please pay me." And they were like, "Well, I don't want to." So they never paid me, and I never posted that commission, and I remember I even deleted the file, so I don't even have it anymore. But I immediately banned that person, and I was so mad. And it was that one instance where I'm like, I'm not. The only time I will ever do this is to trusted people. And my trusted commissioner list is literally 3 fucking people. Because these are people who have commissioned me so constantly that I know they're good for it. And they're all good friends of mine, and I all have their personal info. So I can trust these bitches. But it's 3 people so far, the time of recording this, that I can trust to where I can get their commission done before I get paid, and then get paid after I finished it. It's just how it is. And that's happened a lot to other people, which is why I'm always hesitant when I hear other artists on YouTube talking about their stories and how they're like, "Oh, well, I send them the file with the invoice." And I'm like, but then they can just download the file and then claim the invoice is fraud. And then they have the art and you don't get paid. Or, they'll be like, "Okay, I sent the money." And they're like, "Oh, no, you didn't." It's like, "Oh, well, I did. And here's proof that they sent it to some random account." It's like, "Well, it's not my account." "Oh, well, I sent the money anyway, so can I have it anyway?" And that kind of shit just happens all the time with artists getting screwed over, which is why I always tell them, okay, please, 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 please take the payment up front. And if you're not confident in yourself, take half payment and then ask them to pay once they're done. If it's something small, like a sketch you can get done really, really fast, then maybe then wait till you get paid. But until that time, don't get ripped off, because they're going to try to rip you off, because that's what always fucking happens. And it's just, it makes me mad because I watch these story times, I watch these YouTubers and these artists talking about it, and it's always because they didn't get paid first. Or a couple of these other instances. But most of the time it's like, well, I want to get paid after it was done. You know, like a normal job. And I'm like, I know, but see, there's a lot of assholes out there. Just like how there's scam artists, there's, you know, well, I mean, that's exactly what it is. I don't know where I was going with that. I don't know, because that was the title of my old video. Was, you know, just, yes, there are artists who scam people, but there are also scam artists. So, another instance I have, this also happens semi-often, not as often as the points one, but this is one that's also just irritating, and it's, now, the only time I'm okay with someone not knowing my commission prices is where it's a place where it's not readily available, like YouTube, like my emails, that kind of thing. But if it's on, like, DeviantArt or Furfinity or Tumblr, I'll have links to where you can read and find my commission info, like, really, really easily. So you can see my prices, what I'm offering, what I'm doing at the time, all that jazz. And I will get people who will, like, randomly note me or PM or DM me or whatever and be like, hey, I want a commission. Where are your prices? And I'll be like, oh, well, it's here. And most of the time, this happens on DeviantArt and sometimes through emails. I've almost never had it happen on Furfinity. And I haven't had any commissions on Twitter, so I don't have any Twitter experience with that. But what would happen would be, I would go through the entire process. They would be like, hey, I want to commission this. And I'd be like, okay, and they're not using my commission template, so I already know they didn't read the TOS. So I'm like, okay, well, what do you want it as? Do you want it as chibis? Do you want it as, like, inks? Do you want it as, like, line art? Do you want it as digital colored? You know, the whole shebang. And they'll be like, oh, okay, I want your top tier stuff, which my current one is, like, my soft shaded colored lines, because that takes me the longest to do. And I'm like, okay. And they would be like, okay, and I want this, and this, and that color style. And I'm like, all right. So, you know, we're interacting. We're being good. We're being chill. Everything seems fine. I get the character references depending on how complex the character is. And most of the time with these fucking people, the characters are really, really stupidly complicated. So I'm like, okay, it's going to be a small fee because they're complicated. And they're like, okay, cool, whatever. And then I'll give them the price. And they're like, oh, that's too much money. And I'm like, oh, okay, well, do you want another option? Do you want, like, yeah? And they're like, oh, okay, how much would it be for cel shaded? I'm like, okay, here's the cel shaded option. Oh, that's still too much money. And I'm like, okay, well, the only other option I have is line art, and that doesn't seem like anything you wanted. And they're like, okay, well, how much would line art be? And then I'll tell them how much it is. And the reason why I'm being vague is because this happens quite often, so it does depend on what they're asking. But they'll be like, oh, no, that's still too much money. And I'm like, how much did you expect to spend? How much money do you have to spend? And then they'll often be like, oh, well, I have, like, $10 or $5. Or I don't have PayPal. Or, oh wait, you wanted me to pay you? I thought we were doing like an art trade. When, like, I've been communicating with these people constantly and my time's just wasted. And that's my biggest thing, is me having wasted time. Because I'm sitting here like, you know, the times I've been corresponding with these dumbasses, I could have been getting actual work done. Or responding to actual emails that are going to help my business. Or, I don't know, work on my own shit. There's so much stuff I could have done with that wasted time. You know, but I'm still very polite, and I'm like, okay, well, I'm sorry, I can't do it unless I'm paid. And they're like, oh, well. And then, often, with these people, but not always, they'll be like, oh, well, you did something for your friend, and that's a gift, and they didn't pay you for that, did they? And I'm like, yeah, because they're my friend. And they weren't expecting this. That's kind of why it's a gift. I just, but it happens so much that it always irritates me, but it's not as often as the DeviantArt points situation thing, but this happens all the time where it's like, they'll get to the process, or I'll go through the process, and then they'll be like, I want to commission you, but how do I pay you? And then I'll be like, okay, I do it this way, and then they are like, oh, well, I don't know if I can. I'm like sitting here like, well, then you can't, if you don't know if you can, then I can't commission you. Or I'll have people try to guilt trip me and be like, oh, well, all I want to do is get art from you. And I know it sounds really egotistical, but it happens a lot. Or they try, like, I know, like, Chaos55T had that happen to her a while ago, where someone, like, she made a video on it. I'll, like, boop it in the iCard or whatever. And she was talking about how, like, this person was trying to guilt trip her and be like, my parents have cancer, and I just want your art. It'll make my day so much better. And it's like, I'm sorry, I can't do this. I have bills to pay. I have things to do. I can't just, because if I make you the exception to the rule every time some person with a sad story, who most of the time, the sad stories are bullshit. I'm not saying all the time, but most of the times they are. You know, then you have to do it to everybody. And I just don't have the time or the patience or the energy to do that. And it's just aggravating that it happens. And then there's the same people on the same boat who compare you to other artists that do it. I've had that happen a ton of times where, like, okay, back in the day, I used to do request streams all the time. And that's also kind of another reason why I want to make Patreon, is I do like doing request streams. I like drawing things for people. Like I said, I like making art because I make people happy through my art. That makes me happy. But, you know, until my Patreon makes a certain amount of money, or I'm making a certain amount of money off of my other side things, I don't have the time to just draw for free for people. But then they'll compare and be like, oh, well, so-and-so does it like once a month and they can afford to do it. And I'm like, yeah, because they can afford to do it. I can't right now. And no one is expected art. Like I've explained before, art is not a necessity. You don't need art like you need food. You don't need art like you need a roof over your head. Okay? You know? And I'm gonna end off this one with one last one, because this is one that, like, traumatized the fuck out of me. This was a long time ago. I'd say about, like, 3 or 4 years ago. It was when Cody and I were in a very, very, very bad financial place. We found out we had to move. Cody had lost his job. I had lost my job at the time. So my only income for all of us, including our bills, including Cody's student loan debt, was on me while Cody was trying to find a job. And all I could do at the time was because I also didn't have a car or a license, so I was pretty much stuck at home. I toured myself out with art, you know? I did a lot of stuff I didn't want to do. And I remember I posted up this Yacha, which is like your character here thing. I'll probably make a video on those later explaining what they are, but it's, you know, I had it up and it was like, okay, here's a made Yacha thing. And this one person, you know, was like, I'll admit, I was spamming it a bit. But I wasn't spamming it too much. This is also one I've talked about off and on streams, where I spammed it, like, I'd say, like, every 3 days, I'd be like, hey, this thing is open. And again, this is back when my prices were really cheap. So I think for, like, both characters, remember it was 2 characters, it was, like, maybe $20 for the whole thing. So it's like $10 a character, and it was going to be fully done, fully colored and everything. I think. I don't exactly remember, but I remember it was really cheap. And so this person messaged me and was like, oh, you must really be desperate. And I remember they said that, like, I must really be desperate. And realistically, I was very desperate. I needed the money at the time. I really, really did. And they were like, oh, well, I'll take the slots. And I was like, okay. And they wanted their character, which was fine for one of them. But for the other character, they wanted me. And I've got nothing wrong with drawing my persona or drawing myself with other people, because I've done that. People have commissioned me to be like, hey, can you draw your persona or fursona or gemsona or whatever sona they want of mine? Pretty much like how I draw myself with my character or me, or doing something like interacting. Like, I'm fine with that. That's cool. You want to commission me to have us draw and play some games together or be stupid? You know, throw money at me. I'll totally do it. But they wanted me to be... okay, first of all, I'm fat. I never said I'm not. But they wanted me to be like that really gross inflation obese. But just for my character, just for me. They want me to draw myself like that with money, begging, and being greedy. And I remember, because I took a screenshot of the original note and I put it on my Facebook because I was just so in shock. And I really, really needed the money. But that moment, it just clicked something in me, and I'm like, you know, I really need this money. I don't need it that bad. I will eat top ramen for a fucking month over this shit, because no. And I immediately told the person that they were way out of line. And again, I've done not safe for work commissions and stuff, but never to that degree, and never to where it was degrading literally my personification of myself. And that's when I was just like, you know, I know this person will pay me, but it's not worth it. It's just not, because that's just gross, and it's degrading, and I I couldn't fucking do it. I couldn't think that lowly of myself to be like, that $20 is really going to make a difference. Which, granted, at the time it probably did. But, you know, I'm still here. We got past that dark time that Cody and I were in bad financially, and now we're doing great. And but I think back to that moment when that commissioner, they thought they owned me, because this happens a lot. I see a lot of people do this, and it's not just with me. My buddy Aerofex has talked about how there's this person that messages them all the fucking time, and is like, oh, well, I know your commissions are like this, but look what I got, because this artist had an emergency sale. And it's like, you know, most of the time when an artist has an emergency sale, it's because it's an emergency, and they really don't want to price themselves that low, but they have to. And there are a lot of people who kind of like wait for those moments and then do the bare minimum. And now I can already see it now. But Michelle, you always talk about getting sales and getting shit cheap, and then it's like, there's a difference. You know, when you're getting something from like a retailer at a cheap ass price, then when someone, this is really drastic, but this has happened semi-recently. It's like when someone's parent literally fucking dies and they can't afford the funeral. Like, that happened to an artist I watched. They're not a friend of mine. I'm not gonna name who it is, but they were opening up for emergency commissions to literally pay for the funeral. And there are people coming out of the woodwork being like, oh, that's still too expensive. Like, can you lower it more? And I just gave that person money because I felt terrible, because they were like, oh, okay, what do you want me to do? I'm like, no, don't draw me anything. I've been there. I mean, not in that sense, but I've been in that bad place. And that's why whenever I can, I try to help them. Compared to the people who they literally, they hold their hands and they wait for like an emergency to happen. No, an emergency commission is completely different than a commission sale. So I've got nothing wrong with people who wait for sales, because a lot of people do that with my work, which is fine. But again, commission sale versus emergency commission, completely different. In an emergency, again, most of the time, not always, they need the money and they need it now. So they're doing stuff they don't want to do to afford said emergency thing. And that's just, that's why when I see these all the time, they just make me mad, because it just, you get taken advantage of. You know, you take advantage of by greedy people who don't want to understand. I mean, who don't understand, and half the time don't want to understand. And so I'm going to leave it here. I hope my you guys didn't mind my stories. I hopefully some of my friends talk about theirs, since I know my buddies have have had their own commission horror stories before. And yeah, I'll just leave it here. I'll see you guys next week, and as always, I will. See you next time. Bye!